Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I'm coming at you with a fairly unplanned video. I was not planning on making or releasing any videos today whatsoever, but in preparation for making some videos later this week, I decided to go ahead and kick on a new VOD release of the 2020 movie Bottle Monster, which was just released on Amazon Prime, maybe a few other places, I don't know. I watched it on Amazon Prime. I need to talk about this movie. Oh my God. Wow. So there's a reason that I picked this one, and this poster is kind of it. See how many laurels there are on this? For a lot of folks out there, I would say, no denigration intended here, but let's just say the uninitiated, there would be a level of response to seeing a poster like that and saying, wow, could it really be that good? And then you have the seasoned veterans that look at a poster like that and all those laurels, like myself, and say, wow, could it really be that bad? This is very much a red flag situation when you see a poster like this and you see just a million festivals listed. But honestly, looking at this even a little bit deeper, a lot of these laurels are winner laurels. A lot of them in other movies will just have official selections and so forth, which basically means they paid enough money to get screened at this particular festival out in who knows where, 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗀𝗀 Peaks, to actually be a winner of various categories. I mean, it can be, let's just say, a little more difficult than that. And, so I wanted to see, did it really earn any of these in any real significant way? How legitimate was this? How bad was this movie really? As bad as you'd ever expect, and worse. Honestly, it's just so terrible. It's honestly... I'm not going to say that it is Birdemic levels of awful awesomeness, but it's getting there. I'm really not joking when I say that it was starting to encroach upon that territory. Written and directed by Marjorie DeHay, this movie stars Billy Prophet as Allison Key, who is a mother that has absconded with her own child, Theo, played by Riker Overacker. She is an alcoholic. She apparently there's some sort of court order coming down for contested custody, but she doesn't care. She straps him in the SUV and takes off and goes and tries to find an apartment or a house or someplace to rent from. And she does by finding the landlord of George, played by Charles in Charge's Willie Ames. The rest of the movie kind of takes place with her trying to take care of him. Meanwhile, there's something in the house that is nefarious and trying to figure out what that is. Now, without knowing a whole lot of any kind of backstory behind the production of this, I do think that there are some further red flags than the laurels, not the least of which I mentioned that the child actor's name is Riker Overacker. There's several Overackers present in this movie in roles and in background and in production and so on and so forth. In fact, the production company is Overacker spelled backwards. So there does seem to be, and this is just speculation on my part. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I do apologize for it. But it kind of shrieks to me of this production company of the Overacker family basically saying, yeah, we'll go ahead and make your film here, but, you want to cast this role. We happen to have our nephew here. It becomes a really oddly problematic thing to cast children in general. It becomes very difficult to have them act with any kind of real believability, sympathy, anything along those lines. And as much as I really don't want to be using this channel to rail on a kid, let me just go ahead and just say everybody in this was just terrible in their performances. God-awful, terrible. And young Mr. Overacker is no exception to that.
I want to go home.
We are home.
I don't like it here.
Well, you're just gonna have to get used to it.
But even if the performances were able to be pulled off in any kind of reasonably adept fashion, everything else was just shrieking of laziness. honestly, that's pretty much what it came down to, especially in the writing itself. There were so many examples of characters being written into corners and then just having easy outs to move on to the next scene, as opposed to actually thinking about how would this person believably react to this? How do we, bring characters to the forefront, anything along those lines. So what we wound up with is a movie that had performances, special effects, set dressing, cinematography, and so forth, indicative of your most terrible shark avalanche versus 16-toed Bigfoot movie, but also really trying to take itself seriously with very dramatic themes. You have a mother that's trying to take custody and take care of her kid that's also battling alcoholism and trying to go into this house, and the house is being nefarious in its own right. So the odds are stacked against things. We have the shining levels of interaction with dramatic elements and characters meeting up with the lazy writing of your most basic sci-fi original. And in that, we wind up with the absolute god-awful mess that is Bottle Monster. Speaking of which, that title, Jesus Christ, it's a little bit on the nose, don't you think? We had characters that were they're walking through this house. She's doing the introductory walkthrough with the landlord, and they're complaining about how, I'm sorry you wanted the place so fast, I couldn't get the cleaning crew in here. They haven't been by in a couple weeks, and she makes the quip of or ever, and making allusions to the notion that this place is a fucking wreck, that everything is just strewn everywhere, that, there's grime and that you need a cleaning crew to really come in and roll up their sleeves. Meanwhile, the actual house that they're standing in seems to be pretty well cared for, furnished, spotless, and some cardboard boxes thrown around. That's the level of dirtiness that they're referencing. It's one of those things where the dialogue that they're speaking doesn't match the reality of our eyeballs. And when you're trying to have a scene in which people are going down into this dark, dank basement to be meeting up with the beady eyes of the monster itself and the layer within and so forth, it doesn't really pay to have your most basic of spirit Halloween cotton spider webs thrown everywhere. That stuff doesn't really look that real to begin with, and if you actually want it to look real, you need to separate and spread it a fair amount. If you just clump it, and I'm talking about in real life, it's even worse on camera. You really need to kind of futz with it and so on and so forth. There's really not a whole lot of good substitutions other than proper spider webs themselves. As in, go find an abandoned building, ask around, see if somebody hasn't been in their basement for a couple of decades, and see if you can take a camera crew down there. It's really not all that difficult to find a good set in terms of these kind of things. Instead, you find the most spick and span, beautifully furnished basement possible, throw up some cotton, and call it the monster's lair. It doesn't work, it doesn't jive, and it is really the cheesiest, laziest way to go about things. And in terms of the writing and how lazy that is, when I talked about how characters are painting themselves into corners and you just try to find the easiest way out of it, how about when the mother calls the police because she can't find her kid, and granted she's only looked for all of about 5 seconds by opening a fucking door and then closing it in again and calling the cops on her cell phone. The police show up. They find her inebriated. They find her in a state that is unable to be caring for a child. Meanwhile, this child seems to be missing. So they handcuff her. Something happens. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but so on and so forth. She needs to, at some point, while she's handcuffed, become more of a mobile, independent person. So what's the writing solution there? Do you go back and do you maybe fix a little bit of the events that happen, maybe fix some of the dialogue about the cops so that she didn't have to be handcuffed, maybe handcuff her to a piece of furniture that could be broken so that she's wandering around with a dangling handcuff? How do you deal with this? How do you address this? How do you deal with this in a way that isn't lazy? Well, apparently the best way possible is for her to just simply slip them off, as if that's in any way realistic whatsoever. But what the hell, it gets us to the next scene. That seems to be really the only thing that mattered about this movie, was getting to the next scene. Doesn't matter if the set design was poor. It doesn't matter if the camera work was poor. It doesn't matter if the performances were poor. It doesn't matter about anything about this movie that should have been red flagged poor. Instead, moving on. Getting to the next scene. Getting something in the can. It's just laughably bad. And as much as I wanted to laugh at it, that was the big problem, was it was serious material. Like I mentioned, if this was the next Sharknado, what have you, sci-fi original, then that would have been a grand time. At the very least, expectations would have been in line. You know, you kick on something from Tubi TV called Baby Frankenstein, you generally know what you're going to get, even though that particular monster didn't match the poster at all. Regardless, you generally know the quality that you're going to be getting yourself into. And with this, you have a fairly straightforward poster. You have laurels all over the place. You have very serious dramatic material. And then you have a meeting with this level of cinematic dreck. And I wanted to laugh at it, but I just wasn't comfortable doing so. This is not a movie that I would say, I struggled with this. I was actually talking with some folks about this. They were asking me, is this so bad it's good? I don't know. It's honestly a little bit difficult for me to process, just because the tone and the intent of it was so serious and dire. I felt bad at laughing at it, but every part of what was actually showing up on my TV screen, I desperately wanted to laugh at. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I wanted to make this video. I wanted to just sit in the chair real quick here and get a video done, because this just hit the VOD market today. And it's something that I just wanted to talk about. If the movie is not going to do a fair representation of itself in its marketing media, then at the very least, I wanted to sit down in the chair and bring forward a fair, honest assessment of what this movie is to you out there. So maybe, now that you've seen this review, if you may want to go ahead and kick it on, you can at least do so with expectations in check, and perhaps for you, this will be the next Birdemic, the next good, bad movie. I honestly hope so. I hope that people have a little bit more fun with this than I did, especially in relation to the expectations that I kind of went into this movie with. I was expecting bad. I wasn't expecting sci-fi original bad. And in that, I'm going to go ahead and close this review out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.